Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Lamb Party Podcast. We got Rob sipping wine and Kickstarters, and we got George, and I'm Steve. What's up?
Hey,
I figure I feel like it'll be more. I would work on that a little bit, but I figured that was pretty fun.
you know what? I should have done the countdown differently because I'm pretty sure that he didn't start recording until like partway through your initial yell.
Should I do it again?
Nah, it's fine.
Okay. It's not like anybody's going to listen to the first
It'll be
episode anyway.
fucking funnier that way, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So what's up, boys? We're giving a shot at a gaming podcast. It's been a dream for me for a long time now. So thanks for doing this.
It's
Yeah,
been my life.
absolutely.
It's been my lifelong dream for the past several days.
I keep trying. I've always been wanting to do it, and the only thing that's like been a deterrent is like the market's so oversaturated. But honestly, like that's not really a reason not to do it. It's just my ADHD brain being like, "Oh, you got to drag me out the door, kicking and screaming."
Yeah.
The biggest thing for me is like because I listen to like a number of gaming YouTubers or news sources, and I hear some of the same shit over and over again. But I think the biggest thing is like people like people's personalities more than anything. So I just go listen to different people for different takes, you know?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between the idea of doing something just because you can and doing something because you genuinely have something to contribute to the medium.
Definitely.
Yes.
And I've actually some of my fondest memories honestly are from like reading like Electronic Gaming Monthly and Game Informer like when I was like 5, 6 years old when I was going to bed or whatever. So like gaming has been a part of my life for my whole life, and I got in art was like the first thing I got into, but gaming is something I want to take a really meaningful place in my life, and I want to figure out how to get involved or get in the conversation more. So I feel like starting a podcast is one way to do it.
Yeah, it's our way of getting involved in the conversation. And it's funny you mentioned getting into art first because I know that a lot of your art and music has been inspired by you know, what gaming has the role that gaming has played in your life. Like I know in particular how you used to play it was either like NES or SNES games with your grandma, right?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and her garden. Like I feel like playing video games with her inspired a lot of your art, and then playing or like doing like spending time with her in her garden inspired a lot of your music.
Yeah, and so I remember like yeah the time period that I was making that stuff that you're referring to. I'm not trying to get all art talky here because obviously this isn't about that, but during that time like I played video games, but I didn't like fully bask into it, and that's kind of what's got me to a point where I would love to I want to host a game podcast with my friends because now I'm just trying to like be all in, you know, dive headfirst into the kiddie pool, or so to speak, you know,
Yeah.
and that actually kind of moves me into one of the talking points I feel like would be a great place to start. What got you into gaming? Yeah, what was one of the inciting things that got you guys into gaming?
I think with me, it's I have like fragmented memories of it, but I remember when I want to say I was 3. My very first game was Alex the Kid on the Sega Genesis, which was like a platformer, and for me, it was always an escape. It was always an escape because I wasn't in the best of situations in my childhood either. So it was just a way to get like kind of like get the hell out of reality, and you know, and honestly, it's nice because it's you know allows you to play a power fantasy. You get to be something you're not in a world that's not this. Because you know we live in this shitty math universe that's boring and has no magic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Well, was Alex the Kid? Was that a Sega mascot before Sonic? I think
I believe he was.
I never played it. It was before my time, but
Yeah, because it was a platformer, but I don't know how big of a mascot he was because I know everybody was basically trying to they wanted to capture that lightning in a bottle that Nintendo did with
sure.
Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I'm looking it
Was
up right now.
was it was it Sega that had that slogan for a while that was like, "We do what Nintendo don't."
Yeah, Sega do what Nintendo
Genesis,
don't.
yeah, Genesis does what Nintendo don't.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it looks like they brought back Alex the Kid as well in 2021.
I'm looking him up.
Alex the adult now.
Yeah.
I really like his design. Actually, it's pretty cool. The old one, that is.
Yeah.
So
You almost had a suit that was like reminiscent of Mega Man.
Definitely, I definitely see that. Yeah, it's really weird, like how like it seemed like in like the mid '80s, all through like probably 2005, be like mascot platformers or mascot games were like all the rage and was like what gaming predominantly was. I think up until up up until like after Jack and Daxter 3, whenever Naughty Dog started doing like The Last of Us and shit. I feel like that all the companies wanted to do platformer, I mean mascot led games.
Mm-hmm.
That
And
was
Alex the
kind of
Kid
like
was.
the. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say just the Alex the Kid also was pretty influential in a lot of other games like Monkey Ball. Because I mean, basically in like Eastern culture, a lot of these characters are based on Sun Wukong.
Oh yeah, definitely. Journey to the West and all that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how I guess the mascot era was kind of the era before now, like the IP/franchise era, where it's less about a specific character and more about a some kind of franchise. Like, for example, Naughty Dog would have the Uncharted games and things like that. It used to be like, oh, Crash, Spyro, Mario, where it was centered around specific, which now that I think about it are all platformers. So it's kind of funny how right around the time we moved from platformers is also when it started to be more about less focused on a single character and more on like developing a world. So kind of funny how those two transitioned together.
And it's funny with like platformers, they were coming up with like, I remember like in the 90s when the PSX came out and they had like a lot of those games were platformers at the get-go because they had Jersey Devil and
Oh, I
Croc.
remember that.
Yeah, and they had Croc. So and those games were like, I went back and they've aged like milk. But I went back because I went back and tried to play some of them and I'm like, wow, these games are not fun anymore, especially because the controls are so like clunky. It's like trying to play like Tomb Raider. If you go back and play Tomb Raider, it's like
It has tank
I,
controls.
yeah,
Without a
like
joystick.
yeah, and every time you try to like take a back step with Laura Croft, like she does like a backward leap and you fall to your fucking death.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like it's like games that game devs were making 3D games before Nintendo made Mario 64, so they didn't have notes to copy off of. But real quick on the platformer thing, I think that Naughty Dog is a great example of like a gradient of that transition between mascot led games and like the what's it called, The Last of Us and Uncharted. Because if you look at like Crash Bandicoot, then the first Jack and Daxter came out, and that was just like straight evolution of Crash Bandicoot. Slowly turned into like a GTA clone. The third Jack was like really dark. Then they released Uncharted. I feel like Uncharted and Crash Bandicoot are like on complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but like you can see through their games they released. It's like it shows you their trajectory toward games like Uncharted and like super realistic games, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't think most platformers did very much world building, so that kind of tracks.
Yeah, no, it's like I think like maybe other than Mario, like Sonic definitely made an attempt in the Sega Genesis era of trying to world build also because like the whole premise was stopping Robotnik from roboticizing all the all like organic life forms.
Sure.
Hell yeah.
And Robotnik had like that big Death Star.
I just wanted to jump back just a little bit to the thing about what got us into gaming. I know for me, it's actually one of my earliest memories, which is kind of cool. It was the very first time I saw Donkey Kong Country at someone else's house. I had never even I don't think I had ever even seen a video game before, and that's a hell of a one to start off of just because it's like such a visual feast. So like I remember just going over to this person's house, this neighborhood kid's house, and not only were they playing Donkey Kong Country, but it was like one of the minecart levels, and I was just like, oh my god, like this is so cool. What even is this? With like the music and like the sound design and everything, where it's like all echoing, and I don't know. And plus, I had already developed a love for trains and anything on rails at that point, so like that just made that
Yeah.
minecart level hit even harder. So like I was that was like an instant, like I was just like head over heels right away as soon as
That's
I took that
You know,
in.
and that's a you bring a good point too. Is that the one thing about Donkey Kong Country that's significant for me is not just the visuals, but the soundtrack was like nothing
Oh,
like
man.
anything that we ever seen
Amazing.
because everything
Yeah.
was always MIDI's back then. And then we finally, because at that point, that was when we were coming into the era when Nuematsu, I'm butchering his name, that he was a composer for Final Fantasy, and he was putting out like huge like orchestra orchestra level like music productions for like these different like fantasy games. And I remember everybody always knows, especially at this point if you follow the memes, like the water levels from Donkey Kong, that music
Oh,
is like a
yes.
huge nostalgia drip.
Yeah. Yeah, it still holds up even now. We went from like 8-bit sounds to like atmospheric synth pads and everything with the SNES, but especially in the Donkey Kong games.
I feel like that generation. Now, I would say, I mean, that generation is definitely what solidified my interest in games. Not me as a full-fledged gamer, but I think that games like Donkey Kong Country, the music, the pre-rendered graphics, like the step up between the NES and the SNES, especially with like a game like Donkey Kong Country, that I feel like is really what solidified gaming as like a cutting edge art form for sure, I think.
Donkey
Yeah,
Kong Country gave me a sense of accomplishment too, because with every world boss that you beat, your banana horde would refill.
Oh, nice. You mean like by your house? Like how
Yeah.
you go underneath it? Yeah.
Yep, right under the cave. Like every boss you defeated, it would add like an entire like mound of bananas, and then by the end of the game, you'd have an entire cavern full of bananas, which is insane too. Because if you consider like that the temperature of a cave is typically 58 degrees, and bananas don't do so well in cold weather, they typically release gas and spoil faster.
Yeah. Do
It's
do you
funny.
think that as adults maybe we're all just sort of metaphorically chasing our own banana horde?
Yeah,
In a
definitely.
sense. Does anybody here think that like does anyone ever feel like video games served as a babysitter? Because I feel like that was definitely a thing in my household also. Because then my mom didn't have to worry about me running around and getting into trouble.
I
I'm
think
wondering.
not for me as much, but well, I don't know. I don't think that it wasn't something for me, at least, that my parents encouraged. If anything, like they usually encouraged me to like spend a lot of time outside and to like, not to be on games too much. But they were also both like really busy. Like my parents were both very busy when I was younger. They both uh worked full time, and I'm an only child. I didn't have siblings, and I'm going to be painfully honest here, I also didn't have a ton of friends when I was younger, so I did end up spending a lot of time with video games in order to kind of, I was a kid who was up in my own imagination a lot, and video games were definitely a great outlet for that.
I think it's exactly the same for me. Like, yeah, I think it probably would have served the purpose as a babysitter, but also I remember like my room was just my domain, whether it be like I remember I had this art desk and like a GameCube when I was younger, and I just remember all I wanted to do was just be in my room. Like I didn't really have a desire to like hang out. I might have like one friend or something like that, but like I would just be in my room. So I mean, yes, I guess de facto it was my babysitter, but I don't feel like I was like necessarily like schlubbed off, told to go
Yeah,
to my
you weren't like pawned off to it
yeah. It wasn't
necessarily.
like a tablet or something. But also another addition. Robert actually mentioned this. I would also go to my grandma's a lot, and my grandma would play Sonic. She had the Genesis, and the Super Nintendo, and she would just like play all the games, and I would watch her play. So I had like a really weird communal experience. And my dad would get old video game magazines, and he would read them to me when I go to bed. So like it was
That's
like
really
a really yeah, it was like a really like not just those. He'd read me like Winnie the Pooh too, but like it was video games were like a really like a way of bonding for me too growing up. So it was a mixture of everything.
that was something I was never really able to have as a bonding thing with my folks, because neither of my parents have ever video games are just never their thing, except when when I did get a little older, and we first had the internet. My dad and I actually ended up playing. It's like the only video game anyway that we've ever played together. It was this like old multiplayer Java based game called Battlefield, and it was like way before the actual like console Battlefield games, but it was just this like very basic game where you would control tanks by like pointing and clicking to tell them where you wanted them to go, or if you wanted to attack another tank. And it was cool because it was like massively multiplayer. Everyone was logged into these different maps. You could choose to go on to different maps, and you would like increase your rank by destroying other people's tanks and stuff. And if you destroyed their tank, they would go down a rank. It was cool. That's like the only game that I've ever played with one of my parents.
My mom
But
actually was really big into fighting games. It was always like Mario Kart and then fighting games, and she'd always want to play Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct, or we do Mario Kart.
that's
That's
sweet.
see,
Wait,
that's yeah. That's
Killer
cool.
Instinct was rare, right? Like that was also pre-rendered graphics like Donkey Kong, wasn't it?
Yep. It was basically it was practically the same engine, I think.
Oh yeah. That one was badass.
Oh, it was. That was the one that like, and also like the commentator was way more intense. It was just something different because Mortal Kombat was all just human beings with different powers, but like these, like you're playing different like humanoid creatures. Like you're a glacier who's like this ice fucking alien who can melt into a puddle like he's Alex Mack, or like you could be Fulgore, which is like this, this full on cyborg.
Was he
Or
the
you had
mascot?
yeah, Fulgore was the mascot. He's the one that has like the two claws coming out of his hands that
Yeah,
are
he
like
looks
like
badass.
yeah.
Oh, I think I know who you're talking about. Even
and
though
they had like combo breakers, and they didn't have fatalities that were like brutally like violent like Mortal Kombat. Like you weren't ripping a person's head out with their spine attached, but like but you had brutal like beatdowns and such. And they did have like finishers, but they didn't. Again, it didn't mutilate your corpse at all. Like Fulgore would turn into this big dreadnought looking fucking thing and like unload his machine guns into the body of the person who's dazed, but like it didn't like rip them apart or anything. It just shot blood everywhere and then they fell down.
yeah, no corpse destroyers.
There were some pretty creative fighters back then. I know there was like clay fighters, which I think actually I know it came out on the N64, but I think it originally came out on the SNES. And there was also I think Primal Rage, that might have been PlayStation. Do you guys remember that one at all?
Primal Rage was Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis,
Oh,
I believe,
oh, it was okay.
and it was on the Game Boy. They had a Game Boy version as well.
Okay, yeah, that's the one with the dinosaurs fight, right?
Yep, and you could eat your followers like to
Oh,
gain
yeah.
health back. You had like little worshippers that treated your monster as a deity, and like if you were low on health, you could eat one of them.
That's sweet. Yeah, I remember actually I had Primal Rage action figures and stuff.
I did too. Those things were really cool looking. They looked like almost like a Todd McFarlane action figure.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I want him back now. I need to go get him.
Now I'll just say I didn't really get heavily into like I loved video games when I was younger, but and I had like a PS1 and an N64 at different points, not at the same time. I had an N64 and a PlayStation, but I didn't really get solidly into console gaming until probably the GameCube generation. And before that, really where my focus was PC gaming. So what's actually kind of nice about that is when we're talking about like nostalgia or like older games is that I can kind of delve into that a little more, because the first game that I ever really truly owned and didn't just play at someone else's house was Roller Coaster Tycoon. So
Which I also have a really formative experience with that one too.
I feel like
That's
so
back
many
when
people, yeah.
that was back when they were on floppy disks too.
I think Roller Coaster Tycoon was right on the cusp there where it was CD, but I did have before that I had a few games on floppy disk, including this awesome Leprechaun themed pinball game that I'll never forget. Yeah, I think I found YouTube videos of it, and it's crazy, but yeah, it was like you had to like activate all the colors of the rainbow, and there was like a pot of gold that you were trying to get to. It was pretty dope.
So I didn't discover PC gaming until the mid '90s. I'd already been into consoles from the SNES and I'm sorry, the NES and SNES, and then I had a friend down that his family had a computer and they had Wolfenstein 3D, Duke Nukem 3D, and Doom. And I remember at one point too, like when I was in school, I believe it was middle school, we had a computer lab, and one of the IT guys uploaded into like their LAN server, like various games like that. And I remember Doom was on our computer LAN system, and then Columbine happened, and they completely did away with all of it.
Oh wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. I was it's weird. I had a computer so young because my dad transitioned into like doing computer-based stuff for work right around the time where personal computers and home internet were very first becoming a thing. So I remember it's like a very hazy memory, but I remember playing floppy disk games on like a Commodore 64, which is pretty crazy because, not that I have very clear memories of that, but just going from that to what we have now and being able to like, view the whole spectrum is interesting. But yeah, I have distinct memories of having a computer desk with one of those built-in like CD racks that you push the thing back. You know what I'm talking about? It had like the thing where you like push it was almost like one of those like folding garage doors, but it was built into the desk and you push it back and it would have all your floppy disks.
I don't think I ever had one of those.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't believe I
weird.
did either, because I remember I just had a disk drive and just pushed the floppy disk in. I don't remember having racks.
Well, no. This was built into the desk. It was like a weird, like how some desks have that weird thing where it's almost like one of those folding garage doors, where it's like a weird, like like almost like blinds or something. And I just remember like, pulling it back and pulling out a floppy disk, and there's the one game was like a recreation of D-Day, but it was obviously like very very like simplistic representation of it, and I could barely figure any of it out anyway. I was like 6.
Having like versions of like racks with like CD racks on desks and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wish I could think of the words to describe it because it's like seared into my memory. It was just like this cool thing having the computer on this old desk, and it had that weird like built-in thing for holding discs or not discs. Well, I guess yeah, they're technically discs, floppy discs. But I feel like I'm saying the word discs a lot. It's starting to lose all meaning.
We're going to change the name to Disccast. Before I talk about other stuff, I did want to mention or talk about what got us into gaming. And Robert, you said one of your earliest memories was with seeing Donkey Kong. I had a similar memory to that, going to, I think it was an Easter actually, and it couldn't have been Link to the Past wouldn't have just come out because I think that came out in 91. But it would have been shortly after, probably like around 1994 or something like that. And I remember walking into the living room and everybody was playing Link to the Past, and like the title screen had just booted up. And I don't know if you guys know what that looks like at all. There's like the Master Sword like flies down and lands in a pedestal, and it's like looming over the Valley of Hyrule or something, and like this like triumphant music comes on. And I had never seen anything like that before. And I walked in the room just as that came on, and I was like, "What the fuck is that?"
The Legend of Zelda was so iconic for me, and will always be one of my most beloved franchises because it it's what instilled the idea of a wandering swordsman, like a hero, that sets out on a quest. Because I was already like getting into Greek mythology at a very young age, and after reading the Odyssey, you know, and I remember that opening because you see like the water and like the horizon with like the mountains and such with the castle, and then the Master Sword slides right through the Z in The Legend of Zelda.
Wait, say it one more time about the Z.
The Master Sword would drop straight down into the Z of
Oh yeah, yeah.
at the title screen, and then also after that, if you waited, they would play a cutscene, pre-rendered cutscenes, kind of explaining to you what was going on and what the hell, what it is that you're doing,
Was that
and
it
give you
had
the premise.
it had like the video of like the imprisoning war or something, right? Like a bunch of soldiers fighting and stuff.
Yeah, it was with the soldiers fighting, and they talk about how the sages sealed the Dark Realm, um, and then it kind of flies into how like the king got an advisor who like misled him, and that's Aghanim. And of course, spoiler alert, you find out that Aghanim is Ganon because he's literally just an avatar for Ganon because Ganon can't go into the light realm. And then they actually even like fleshed that out. There's a graphic novel. I remember I had the OG version of it, and then Ashley, Rob's wife, she found another version of the graphic novel for A Link to the Past, and it really fleshes out a lot of what's going on. Like they actually have like panels that show like Ganon when he was in his human form before he got transformed into like that pig monster. And it was because he broke into the Dark Realm and wanted to steal the Triforce of Power.
So cool. So is it like very similar to the story of Ocarina then? Do you think?
No, because it didn't necessarily go with the time traveling aspect of it.
Okay. Okay.
And we all know that like Zelda's timeline is extremely convoluted, and a lot of that's because of Shinto Buddhism and reincarnation. It's kind of like how with what the hell is the Birdman's name in DC Comics? Hawkman.
Oh
Is that what
yeah.
it is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same deal with him. His backstory is similar, like where him and his lover like constantly die and are reborn throughout eons, and it's like, so it's very similar to that kind of like aspect too of like constant reborn and like, and then they've of course fleshed that out and then converged all the timelines into like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
I find it interesting that the first thing that you really fell in love with gaming, it seems like, was the type of role that you could fall into. And for me, I know the first thing I really fell in love with gaming was atmosphere. Like the first time I played Spyro the Dragon at one of those demo stations at like it was like a Walmart or Sears or something, and just like because that game is really well known for its like the atmosphere that it creates, kind of a very ethereal, like cozy atmosphere. That
Mm-hmm.
was kind of the first thing that I fell in love with games, was just like these weird feelings that they gave me that I couldn't describe. Not so much what I could do in them, but like how it just made me feel to be immersed in that, like a different world. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really care if I had these powers or whatever. It was more about like just the the feelings that it gave me to feel transported to another place that you couldn't quite describe, and like I didn't have the words to describe it. Maybe still don't.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with my childhood, like like dealing with all the trauma and being in a position of like abuse. I gravitated towards power fantasies because I was always just like I would always romanticize or fantasize about the idea of being strong enough to like defend myself and others.
Yeah, you were able to put yourself into a role where you had power over your environment instead of the situation that you were already in. And for me, even before games, I had always been obsessed with the idea of like magic and like other worlds and stuff. I think I would have dreams about things like that, and then games where it's like, oh, this is this avenue to like explore that in something at least slightly closer to reality, or at least like
Yeah,
waking reality.
and I think
That's
that plays into why like the class archetypes that I'd always gravitate towards were like melee characters rather than casters or like stealth rogue type characters because I was always kind of thrust into the idea of being in a more confrontational frontline role.
And something that I've noticed is that you generally tend to gravitate towards things like paladins and other characters that are generally focused on, or like part of their identity is protecting others who can't protect themselves. So I think that's kind of cool that you ended up gravitating towards like, I'm going to do for other people what I wish someone would have been able to do for me. And that just
Yeah.
that shows a really good quality about someone, that is the way that they work through their trauma, is by
That makes me
trying
think,
to rectify it through like vicariously through defending other people.
that makes me think a lot about, well, we're talking about Zelda, thinking about like, Link versus Ganon. Oftentimes Link is like a 10-year-old, or isn't like, is like maybe 13. You know what I mean? I think that like is a really awesome narrative, that like a kid who is, I mean, usually a kid that age is powerless, like, but it shows you that a kid that age can save the world essentially, or
Yeah,
can
that's
Yeah.
why that's why Ocarina of Time like was such a huge deal for me. It wasn't just the visuals and having that sandbox world. It was also of like, wow, you're like this 9 or 10 year old child. I think Link's like 10 or 11 or something in that game before he takes the Master Sword. And it gave me a sense of like, wow, even a kid has the ability to like fight these monsters and like defend against evil.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, and not to mention that even when Link is portrayed as an adult, he's usually not like a hyper you know, an overinflated representation of masculinity. He usually tends to be, uh just kind of, he's not like this crazy, like, buff. It's more about his like skill and tenacity and agility and everything. He's not like, he is a power fantasy, but more in how capable he is, not so much in like, oh, he's just like this like huge hulking warrior. He's actually like usually pretty uh built pretty slender, and you know, I find that
Actually,
interesting.
his design in Ocarina of Time, I would say, even looks kind of feminine.
Yeah, he's not like this paragon of hyper masculinity, and
Right,
I think
that's yeah.
if I remember correctly, like someone at Nintendo has even stated that, or someone who worked on one of the Legend of Zelda games has stated that part of the reason for his kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for, when someone is not, uh, his
Androgynous.
androgynous, yeah, his like kind of androgynous nature makes it easier for people of either gender to
The
kind of,
self-insert, right?
yeah,
Because he
to
was named Link.
self-insert.
Yeah,
Yeah, because that was the reason why they named him Link, is because he was supposed to be the link between the gamer and the world.
definitely.
Okay. So that
Um,
seems like one of those things that could either be like an actual fact or one of those factoids that someone like that's more like headcanon that
I'm
gets
pretty sure
around.
that's what it was supposed to be.
I believe that's
Yeah.
what I believe that's what what's his name?
Shigeru
He
Miyamoto?
always comes out with the Master Sword and the Hyrule Shield.
Yeah,
The
Shigeru
Japanese.
Miyamoto.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I remember, like, I've watched like documentaries and stuff about it. Like, yeah, it was supposed to be the link between him and no, the player in the game, I guess.
And also like Japanese games historically, male characters are more effeminate. Because I mean, I like especially like because I brought up Final Fantasy earlier, like because that game was notorious for like your character was kind of like a pretty boy, femme guy, whatever, and like um the antagonist was always like these menacing, like super hyper masculine looking like characters. They
I'm
always had like cooler looking
visualizing,
armor.
yeah, I'm visualizing for some reason whenever I think hypermasculine, I just think of what is it, Senator Armstrong
Yeah,
from Metal
from
Gear Rising.
yeah,
And that whole meme
Forever.
of like, my sources, I made it the fuck up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that is like a perfect example. That character right there is a perfect example of like a hyper masculine power fantasy.
And he was one of arguably the most difficult. That was one of the worst difficulty spikes in gaming I've ever experienced. Is fighting fucking Senator Armstrong.
I
who's he
barely played that game.
antagonist from?
It's from Metal Gear. I think it's called Revengeance.
Oh, that's the one that what's it
Yeah,
called?
Metal Gear Rising Revengeance or whatever.
The people
And you
who
play
made
as Raiden. You play as Raiden.
the people who made what's that game series called? Bayonetta. What's that? What team? No, I don't remember the name of the team right now, but they're like, they make really intense, over the top games.
Yeah, because
And
those games, because what popularized that really, even though they weren't the first ones to do it, but what popularized it was Devil May Cry.
oh yeah, you could like
Okay, yeah.
juggle people with your guns and stuff.
Yeah, you could do like ridiculous, like fucking like air combos where you jump up in the air and keep slashing them.
Now I've never played Bayonetta, but
That's
you know,
that's Bayonetta was one of them. Yep.
girls with glasses, man. I'm just gonna say that. Yes, chef, yes. It's not even
And
that
she was a
she's like
witch.
stereotypically, yeah, it's not even that she's stereotypically sexy in other ways. It's just like I love that they gave her glasses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she
And
almost kind of reminded me of Lulu from Final Fantasy X.
She does not have glasses, but damn, Lulu is, yeah. Lulu is like
she has like a
kind of
headband
my
on.
awakening for like goth mommy uh, stereotypes. Yeah.
Um. So wait, give me 1 second. I'm switching tabs really quick. So we touched on what got us into gaming. What is I don't know if favorite game of all time is a good question, but what is one of the games that has left the biggest impression on you?
Majora's Mask.
Mm,
Because
yeah.
Majora's Mask deals with the 5 stages of grief. And I was dealing with a lot of grief at the time. And I remember also, like, when my grandfather passed away, that was a big game that I gravitated back towards.
That
So,
makes a lot of sense.
so he passed around the time that that game came out.
No, he passed like 4 years after it came out, but it was already my favorite Zelda by then because the level designs were great. I loved all the side quests and chasing after all the masks, and still to this day, in my opinion, the Stone Temple is the best designed Zelda dungeon ever.
Were
Is
you
that
replaying it around that time? Because I know with a favorite game, like, you end up
Well, so
going back and
here's a funny story about that. That was one of the games that required an expansion pack, and because my family, because I was in a single parent household, my mom's like, strapped. I didn't get an expansion pack right away because before they sold it exclusively with Donkey Kong 64. And finally, when they became pre-owned, I was able to Shanghai her into getting it for me so I could play Majora's Mask. So I remember it came out in November. I can't remember what year off the top of my head. But it came out in November in the late
2000?
90s. 2000, okay, that's what it was. And I couldn't play it for like almost like 6-7 months because I didn't have this fucking expansion pack. And I remember I had a friend next door that had an expansion pack, and I'd bring my game over and I'd play it. And but I was never able to progress far enough, like to, I was only able to get to the very end sequence of the first part of the game where you get sent back to day one by Majora, when you're at the top of the clock tower.
Time too, if you think of like obviously guides weren't, I mean you could get guides, but they weren't the same that they are now. So like you're kind of the way that game sets you up, it doesn't tell you that you can reset. Well, obviously it does later, but like you are trying to figure out how to do it, and if you don't do the things right, you'll die and have to restart essentially. And like I don't know how old I was, but like I was not like a teenager at that point, and I remember like being freaked the fuck out and having like existential dread, and like not being able to move forward in the game because of how much terror that first
Dude,
3 day cycle caused me.
fuck yeah, dude. And the whole time too, every day that moon gets closer and it has that fucking face and you're just looking up at it, you're like, oh my God, we're done. This is it. There's nothing you can do to stop this thing. And I even like got to the I even had it crash into the clock town too, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. It was almost like when in Final Fantasy VII when they summon Meteor.
oh
I
yeah.
I don't know about that. I haven't really played any of the Final Fantasies.
I felt the same way about the first Pikmin because you're on a time limit for that entire game.
Mhm.
And it's not like one of those things where it's like, oh, like if you screw up, you can just go back to your last save. It's, every time you save, like it's progressively further along that timeline. So unless you advance at a certain pace, you're basically stuck with starting from the beginning if you haven't made enough progress. Like if you're only 50% of the way through and you're on day 29 and you only have 30 days, you're screwed. You have to start over. So like I did not handle like time limits stressed me out when I was younger. I hated anything that was on a time limit.
Yeah, me
because
too.
again, my focus was on things that were like I really absorbed atmosphere and like exploration and environmental stuff. I did not like now I actually like things that are a time challenge, like time trials, but back then it felt like it put me under pressure, like I couldn't take the time to fully absorb all of the great, atmosphere and details, which is why I'm so glad that for the sequel they did away with that time limit.
Mhm. I
I
know that's
So,
like those time constraints definitely were stressful for me. Because it took away your ability to stop and smell the roses.
yeah,
yeah,
and it
especially
had like
for
minor disassociations playing that because of that reason.
yeah, especially for I feel like people with ADHD, I feel like, I mean, it can swing either way. I know that sometimes a time crunch can actually cause you to do your best work, but that's work, not play. And so, it was like when I'm trying to relax and enjoy something, I want to kind of just be able to, yeah, to just have time to drink everything in. Challenges are one thing, but something time based, just it's like a primal activates some sort of like primal threat response.
Well, question being, what would those games, and obviously we're talking about, like that being such a stressful thing, especially for kids, like not really having a concept of planning or time, maybe at that point in life, especially I didn't. Like, I don't think Majora's Mask would be like it wouldn't communicate what it's trying to communicate if that timing wasn't a part of it. And I think the first Pikmin as well, I feel like was all about you're stranded on a planet, you need to get back, you need to get somewhere, like, or repair your ship. I feel like time was a really important part of those games, even though they did kind of fuck our heads up a lot.
Mhm.
No, I do agree. It's just like at the time, like I wasn't equipped to handle that kind of pressure
I mean, it's
because
the same thing for me
yeah.
too. I wasn't able to do it either.
You know what? It was right in my wheelhouse. My Majora's Mask was because of being in a traumatic household. And having ADHD. Um, or not a traumatic household, but a household with trauma. And it was it made me. It was like all throughout my life, I've done really well in crisis management. Um, I would never panic. It's weird because I'll panic at a stack of bills that I have to open on my fucking table. But like, if I'm in a crisis situation, like, there's someone gets into a serious accident and somebody has to like take charge, like I have no issues whatsoever. Like I can stay cool as a cucumber.
I think that's because things like bills are more uh, conceptual. Like you can see the implications of that stretching out before you, and it's like all of these different like possibilities. Whereas like when you're in a crisis, it's like time comes to a you know narrows down to just that moment. Almost like you're being forced to expel all the other thoughts and like ways that your mind could go with it and just hyper focus in that moment, instead of letting your mind like spiral into all these other thoughts. So it actually makes sense to me that like in a crisis, it can almost feel comforting because our brain's natural response to a crisis is to kind of like narrow our focus. And that is
Was just
actually
full
something
flight.
that ADHD people search for and even medicate for to get their mind to do. So it's
Yeah.
almost like that surge of adrenaline is taking the place of what, you would normally use therapy or drugs or something in order to achieve.
Yeah, it's just full fight mode or
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Which is
Like you,
why I'd be okay with things like boss fights because that's sort of like a immediate crisis of like, okay, you know exactly what you need to do. It's just a stressful situation, but you can hyper focus on it. Whereas an overarching thing of like a time limit represents 1,000 different problems because you have to solve every puzzle along the way to that, and you don't necessarily know what they are, what order, how to accomplish them. So it's like an infinite number of potential problems to be distracted by instead of the one that's right in front of you. That might be scarier. It might be scarier in the moment because it's a bigger threat, but it's at least one you can identify that's right there in front of you. You can process it in that moment.
Hmm.
It's,
uh,
the fear of the unknown is always the biggest, That's like the biggest for just about anyone.
Well, yeah, isn't that's essentially the basis of what faith is people are afraid of what they don't understand or know. So they have to they use belief to give them hope. People don't know what happens when you die, and they don't know what's out there in the universe. So we conceptualize things that we can try and explain away, what's going on.
Yeah. So that not knowing, knowing that there's this horrible consequence, like, oh, if I don't beat the game in 30 in-game days, then I lose, but not knowing in advance what you can do to actually accomplish that. It's like, that's knowing for certain that there's a serious consequence, but not knowing for sure that you can do it. And that is kind of a existentially terrifying concept versus if you're in a boss fight, you're like, oh, okay, like I know what I need to do. I just need to win this fight, and then I can progress, and that's not so bad.
And maybe, do you think that that's part of the reason why a game like Pikmin, or I would say especially Majora's Mask, was so like stressful, or like for me, like kind of traumatized me because it's not fitting in the traditional power fantasy or paradigm of what games were most of the time up until that point? I think
I,
Majora's Mask, there hasn't, as far as I'm aware, there aren't a lot of games that still to this day tell that same, not necessarily the story, but like that tell that same or recreate that same experience, Groundhog Day sort of experience.
Yeah, I mean, especially now because games, a lot of games are like, there's a lot more content and, open world. Like, it's like the whole point is, hey, like, we want you to experience everything that there is. So there's not that kind of pressure. But I think the reason why a game like that sticks in people's minds so much and is the kind of experience that it is because it kind of mirrors real life in the sense that, like, yes, you're living out a power fantasy in that you are more capable or powerful than the person you actually are in real life. But at the same time, there are still circumstances or uh, things out there that still dwarf whatever, enhanced abilities that you have. So it's kind of like you, your power is magnified fivefold, but the existential dread is also magnified. The stake, your abilities are increased, but so are the stakes. So it kind of just, if anything, I guess what it really comes down to is games like that force you to face your own mortality in a way that, you know, a lot of other games actually allow you to escape from, which explains why it would cause that dread.
Especially, and I really can't keep going back to the point of, or no, I can't go back to it enough of, those are concepts that I don't think children have had to grapple with yet at that point.
Yeah, that's
Or
like when, because on the topic of Zelda, I didn't realize this until I was a young adult, but like Link's Awakening is like one of the most dark and mature storylines. You don't think that looking at it because everything looks so like jovial and like sprightly, but then you like when you think about the real heavy concepts, it's like Link has to choose to lose someone that he loves and destroy an entire world by waking up the windfish. Like that's a heavy decision.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's so weird. Like if you look at that, you look at Ocarina of Time, you look at Majora's Mask, or Link to the Past. Those games on the surface are obviously portrayed as children's games, but all of them have like a morose story to tell, or like some sort of like, yeah, especially like that, the ambiguity like of that game, or I wouldn't even say ambiguity, how dark that the ending of that game is, like it's really really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. That's why, Nintendo, like, despite whatever, and there are very valid criticisms of Nintendo that I could definitely probably write a book on. Despite, and that's the thing too, because I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but like I'm not blinded by my fanfare. I can take something that I love and objectively criticize it for what its flaws are. And I think anybody should do that. I think it's really one-dimensional, and it doesn't show a person has any real abstract thinking if they can't criticize something they love.
It is important to be critical of the things that you love, just like, like that's why if you're really a friend to someone, you'll hold them accountable, like the people that
100%.
we love, those are the people that we should, be willing to, because we know them and because we have rapport and like, a relationship with them that gives us credibility. Yeah, when you have a relationship with somebody, you
When
have
they're
more
fucking up.
credibility to criticize it.
Yeah. Like like you've played, so let's say 300 hours of Zelda. Whenever it's not doing good. You know what I mean? Now,
Yeah.
with that being said, do you think Nintendo would make a game as daring as a Link's Awakening or Majora's Mask these days?
I think they would. I think the only problem is the Japanese are their biggest enemy, their own biggest enemy when it comes to storytelling in times, because they're so rigid, and stubborn, about how these concepts have. And I mean, and that's not like,
You mean in the corporate sense or in their actual narrative?
I'd say culturally speaking.
Gotcha.
I mean, they're also, you gotta factor in, they were an isolationist nation until 150 years ago. And even then, the only reason why they opened up their borders is because America parked its warships on their fucking shores and was essentially like, you'll do business with us or we're going to make you. You either do it willingly or we will make you. And that's essentially what it came down to. Now, granted, they whitewash history in our public school system, and they don't tell you these things. That's why, like, when they talk about when the pilgrims come to America, they're like, oh yeah, we met up with the Indians, they taught us how to make corn, and we had Thanksgiving. And it's like, they don't go into the Trail of Tears or Manifest Destiny.
Yeah, and now it's like, oh, and the Indians agreed to share land with us.
Yeah, exactly. Even though, like, and the thing is, in a sense, it's not. There is some truth there, because they had no concept of like
ownership in that sense.
They had personal property, but they didn't or they had personal material items, but they didn't believe in owning the earth. They thought that we as human beings all have the earth is ours.
Yeah,
and then
our concept was we'll purchase it and then we'll own it, and their concept was like, oh, like we're agreeing to like share it, like have a shared existence in this territory.
Exactly. And then that's when, like, without going too heavily into politics or anything, but that's like, when the concept of it, capitalism came around, they're like, this place was ripe for the picking. This was untapped land. The only, other than like, the indigenous tribes that were existing here, like most other visitors to this place were just explorers. Like the Vikings did it, the Spanish did it. There's even more things coming out now that the Malians did it, which they were they were a Western African kingdom. There's a lot of like, I don't know enough to say what's true or not, but there's a lot of like a lot of information out there now coming out that, like, there's African civilizations that have came to America and have seen South and Central and North America.
So with that being said, how does Japan's rigidity influence the way? How does that negatively affect their storytelling?
They're very averse to change. I mean, even now, like, you can't even go into certain bathhouses if you have a tattoo that's visible.
I have heard that. Yeah, because they associate that with the Yakuza, right?
Yes, and they you can't even lift weights in a gym without long sleeves on in certain gyms.
So I guess you would call that like they have a more conservative approach to storytelling.
They do. Now, granted, I think things are starting to change. They're becoming a little bit more open-minded. But it's a very complicated thing that I don't want to oversimplify with just cultural differences either, because these are also people who were tragically fucking annihilated by our government. So
change in culture tends to be slow. Subculture can be fast, but overall, yeah.
Because not only did our government bomb the fuck out of them, but then they parked a military base on there, and like, you can look it up. Like, you're not going to find it on any of our our media, but like, there's always stories of like Marines leaving the base and like raping women and like committing crimes and being drunk assholes. You know what I mean? Completely disrespecting the culture.
We could have a whole second podcast about U.S. military imperialism.
Oh yeah, we absolutely could. That's why I try not to. I have to catch myself because I will fucking start. I will start I'll start proselytizing the hammer and sickle real quick.
It'd be really funny if we had a designated sound effect where it like came in whenever it's like, all right, that's for our other podcast.
Well, I do think that sort of stuff is interesting, and like I don't know is the right word. It's interesting in an anthropological sense how, because obviously the art that a culture makes is affected by what's going on in the culture. So what we started talking about was what got us into video games, and obviously our culture, in one way or another, crafted our love for it. The same way, what's happening in Japan would affect the output or the stories Nintendo tells or doesn't tell. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And to go back to that, when you said, like, do you think that they would make a story that daring today? I feel like maybe they could, but it does feel like the trend that they have been going towards, I feel like, especially from the Wii onward, is more towards like kind of safe, sanitary, not completely, but
Yeah.
largely.
They want it to be. They want everything to be
Family
family
friendly.
oriented.
Yes, it's all like very, family friendly, at least in terms of like first party stuff. So I think that, they're probably not just, I mean, I'm looking at like uh even like Super Mario, like compare Super Mario Odyssey to Super Mario 64, where there were some like darker, scarier elements in 64, whereas like in Odyssey it just has this, the whole entire time just has this kind of like I don't know, like Saturday morning cartoon feeling to it, which I like.
Yes.
But
But it doesn't. It's afraid to go into something that would be uncomfortable for somebody.
That's
Yeah.
I was gonna say darker, but not darker. Yeah, anything uncomfortable, I feel like they're averse to that now.
That's what happened with like like with Mario 64. I remember like I replayed that like a few years ago, and I remember like there was like way darker like levels and like darker feeling shit, and then like after like Mario Sunshine came out, huh?
Like the music in the haunted level in Mario 64, like the boom.
Yeah, like that was straight up traumatizing. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was so cool.
but the
it was
atmosphere,
cool.
yeah,
I loved it.
you can't. That's the problem with, and because I don't want to say that I'm going to be our resident expert on atmosphere, but that's something I'm passionate about. And the thing is, if you cut out when you cut out darker elements because you want to make things like more sanitized, you are literally cutting out half of to oversimplify things, half of atmosphere is the light and half of atmosphere is the dark. So like if you want to sanitize everything and just focus on like the light, more upbeat stuff, you're cutting out a huge portion of what, stirs the soul. Like looking into that dark place. That's really important in, I think, any form of art, and that includes games.
Not to backtrack too far, but one thing I also wanted to add about all this stuff is, and why I asked that question about if Nintendo would make this stuff now, is I almost felt like games like Link's Awakening, and Majora's Mask were honestly like the equivalent of like punk rock for video games. Like, and like Link's Awakening was made by like devs on off hours that weren't so the game wasn't being overseen by managers because they were like, oh yeah, do whatever, do this, and they make whatever you want because they didn't think the game was going to go anywhere or whatever.
Yeah, so it's so interesting when they give someone carte blanche because they don't think the game is going to succeed anyway, and then it ends up being a smash hit because they're not on rails.
Exactly. That's like that. The whole reason why Final Fantasy is named what it's named is because Square, when they created it, that was going to be their final game because they thought they were going out of business.
Oh, that's crazy.
Hail Mary, yeah.
Yeah, it was. It literally was just a shot in the dark, and then it fucking blew up, and now it's like, it's still a staple, even though it's definitely waning in terms of popularity because,
same reasons that the Nintendo stuff, because they're curating it more toward people or toward like a mass audience.
That's
like
what it comes down to, is they're playing it safe. Whenever you play it safe with art, you usually create something that people have a hard time relating to.
Well, I think also the problem happens too right now, that all developers, and this has been a problem with art since time immemorial, since art's been a concept, is that they have to circumnavigate or kind of like juke and jive through this obstacle course of like trying not to piss off people who are recreationally outraged. Because so many people spend so much free time in their life just being pissed off about some made up bullshit in a game. And and some of it's manufactured to be divisive on purpose. And some of it's used because infamy is still, even bad press is still good press. You're getting
it still gets people
exposure.
talking about it. Yeah.
So it's, but
well, hey, I will say this: I just noticed that the ticker went to like an hour, and I don't know what kind of time frame we were shooting for per episode.
Do you want to do an hour and a half?
I'm okay with that. I was also thinking we could actually, because I don't know about you guys, I'm feeling fairly talkative still. We could always cut this here and just record a second episode, because podcasts do that. They'll record like multiple episodes at a time.
Yeah, you could edit out all of this. You could edit out all the spitballing we're doing right now. And
I think it's good. But actually, I never got to answer the part of what's my favorite game. But what were we about to say, Adam?
Yeah, no, I get. Yeah, because nothing says it has to be exactly an hour. I just figured I would throw that out there. That nothing says that if we're on a roll that we can't. Lots of podcasts or YouTube channel stuff do multiple episodes of content at a time, and then just
Yeah, we didn't. We kind of segued off of what I said my favorite game was when I talked about Majora's Mask, and neither you nor Rob got to talk about what not maybe not necessarily greatest game of all time, but like one of your most iconic games that like comes to mind.
Sure. Our first episode can just be a double.
Yeah. Well, so the way I have the talking points set up, I have like, what's your favorite game? What got you into gaming? My concept of like a gaming hobby, and then there's like more actual concrete like talking points. What if we just finish covering these more like abstract topics, and then next episode, or like we can do that still. We'll cover like Oblivion, switch to Schedule 1.
Yeah, our premiere can just be a double. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, Rob, whenever George said what's it called? Majora's Mask was one of his most influential games. You said Pikmin. Was that your pick, or was that just your response?
That was just one that like, if we were on the subject of games that cause existential dread, that's why it came to mind. But funny enough, the sequel, Pikmin 2, is definitely up there in terms of one of my favorite or most influential games of all time. That, to me, is not only an example of a near perfect sequel, but just a near perfect game in general. Like, I honestly can't think of anything that I would criticize about it, which is, that's saying something. Like, I really don't. I'm sure that if I sat down and I set out with the intention of finding something to criticize, I could find something. But just in general, like, that is a game that I can go back and love playing every single time.
They set a really high standard on like just pure fun and like environmental manipulation, and then rather than reinventing the wheel or trying to fix what wasn't broken, they just build upon it. It set a really good foundation.
And I can tell you right now, games like Pikmin 2 is an example of, it's funny, like, people use Shrek 1 and 2 as an example of like, hey, here's a thing that was great, and then had a sequel that basically, like, the perfect sequel, where it took everything that was good about the original and made it better. I do agree with that about Shrek 1 and 2, and I agree, I feel that way about Pikmin 1 and 2, and in terms of other games that I think did that, and also games that are like hugely influential for me, Ratchet and Clank.
Well, before you go into that, can I respond to the Pikmin thing?
Oh yeah.
So, for one, I had the first Pikmin whenever it came out on GameCube. It was one of the like launch titles I think I got, but I don't think I ever moved on and played the next one because of the time element of it. But also, what I wanted to add was it's funny that you're saying how Pikmin was one of your favorite games of all time. I can almost see how that, or Pikmin 2, that is, I can see how that informed your play style with future games, given like Factoria and a lot of the sim or or I don't know if sim is the right word, management games that you play. You're managing.
Yeah,
It's like
management is the yeah.
it's like Management 101. Like it's like a simple RTS game. You know what I mean?
Yes, actually, there's a term for that now that I really like. It's called management 'em up instead of like beat 'em up is management 'em up games, and I really like that.
That is
I
really
don't know.
good.
It's a term that I haven't heard used very much, but that's pretty much uh yeah, like where you're uh it's more about the control and like the tactic or strategic gameplay.
That makes a lot of sense.
But yeah,
But so you wait, keep going.
I was gonna say as far as the comparison I was making with Ratchet and Clank, the first game was great. It was a lot of fun. The second game was pretty much perfect. That's another game where I really don't know that I could come up. I could if I really tried, but I don't have any criticisms of it really, especially because it filled that, it hit that spot of like, oh, everything you liked about the original is still there, plus things have been improved on or, expanded. And those are just really fun games. I feel like I don't find a lot of people who had the same relationship with those games I had when I was younger, because those were some of my favorite games when I was younger. And that
PlayStation. You didn't have PlayStation, so I didn't get to play them. But
yeah, I have I had like friends at the time that played them, but like nowadays, like it's almost like, I mean, people are familiar with the current ones more so, but
what I will
the
keep going.
originals were great.
What I will say about them, though, to touch back on our one of our first talking points about we were talking about mascots throughout the ages. I feel like Ratchet and Clank, especially like the second one or like the second and third ones, we're right at a turning point with gaming where we move from the previous generation to the modern generation of gaming where it was starting to because it was like what do you know who made okay, so Naughty Dog made Crash, then they made Jack, then they made Uncharted. There's a really good transition there, like I said, a gradient. I know that who made what's the studio that made
So
Ratchet and Clank?
Ratchet and Clank was made by Insomniac, who also
What
made
did they make
Spyro.
before? Oh, Spyro. Okay,
Yes,
Spyro, Ratchet and
great
Clank.
studio.
Then they made Infamous. I'm pretty sure. I
Yes,
think that
Infamous was
Yes,
pretty good too.
and I
so.
think
Like,
they were also responsible for the why can't I think of it? It's the games where Resistance. They were also responsible for the Resistance
Oh
games.
fuck, I forgot about the Resistance games. They were good.
Yeah.
so that's like
You
a
know,
really crazy gradient. What were you about to say?
I was gonna say when I was younger, my dream job was actually to work for Insomniac someday, because not only were they responsible for two of my favorite game franchises of all time, but they were also, I don't know if this is still true, but at one time they were considered one of the best workplaces like to work for in the world, because um they were just really really good to their employees. They would like do like yearly cruises for all the employees. There was like a 7-Eleven inside the games, the building, like where their headquarters was, like a 24/7 like, mini mart where you could go. And they had a lot of crunch. I know from like watching documentaries and stuff, they dealt with some serious crunch issues, but it just seemed like it would have been a really cool place to work for. And when I was younger, I was like, oh, well, I'm obsessed with video games. I should probably just get a job doing that someday. I was like, yeah, like Insomniac should be my goal.
That's like when the studio, and I don't remember who it is, but it might have just been Sony, but I remember like the studio that developed like Gran Turismo. They were one of the ones in a documentary where they showed that people had cots that were sleeping in their office.
I think, honestly, that might be more common than not with a lot of, you know, I don't know, maybe that's a bit extreme to say. It's just like as I watch more and more like behind the scenes things, I just you hear about these crazy stories related to games development cycles where the crunch is just absolutely insane. And funny enough, I was just watching on YouTube the other day one about the development cycle of the Metroid Prime games, and there was some serious crunch involved with those games. And that kind of brings me around full circle to, if we're talking about most influential game or the one that had the biggest impact, Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime is my number one game of all time, I think. Honestly.
That's a solid pick.
I wish we had a mic drop or a big dunk dunk dunk
Yeah.
sound effect for that.
It's like asking me to pick a best friend, because then that makes me feel like, oh, well, whoever I don't pick is going to feel like kind of awful. I have, like, I don't know that I could say I have a favorite game or a favorite movie or a best friend. There's more like these exclusive circles where it's like you are in that like illustrious category of like, just that highest possible echelon. So I can't say Metroid Prime is my absolute favorite game of all time, but it is in the highest tier.
Well, and if you think about that, like Metroid Prime doesn't play like Pikmin plays, which doesn't play like
Yes.
Majora's Mask
Yeah.
plays. So
They scratch different itches. So I can't say, depending on what my mood is, that's gonna, have an impact on that. So again, it's like, I couldn't say, if someone said, "Oh, who's your, favorite person in the whole world?" Like I can't like rank people like that, like one over the other, but like I have that tight inner circle where there's just this highest possible echelon where like I can't, like, oh, this person's an acquaintance, I like them, but like no, like for example, like both of you are in like my highest echelon of like people that I am the absolute closest to, like the people I love the most.
and I
Not
think
to get
it'd
all
be such
mushy, but
and yeah, I feel the same. And I feel like whenever you think about people though, like it it especially whenever you're like well, I know we're talking about games right now, but especially whenever you're like the person and whenever you really start to get to know a person or you play a bunch of a game for that matter, it's not comparable at all. It's a completely different experience. So like why would you rank it? And I think that's like what makes say favorite game experience is that if it's your favorite, hopefully you didn't play the same like say your top 5 games. Hopefully you didn't play the same like game or hopefully your top 5 games are the same experience. You know what I mean?
yeah. Well,
Hopefully they're
that's
like
a very human thing in order to like better structure our lives. We have a natural tendency to want to quantify or qualify things. And I think, again, it's easier for me to say, like, when like I can't tell someone what's my favorite game or what is my favorite movie or whatever, but I could list some of my favorite games or some of my favorite movies or albums, and that would still give someone a very clear idea of like, you know, who I am and like what my biggest influences have been, instead of having to pick like a clear winner.
Well,
You
that's
know?
all, when you appreciate gaming as a medium, it's really hard to like, because again, like I know I dropped me at Majora's Mask, but like I could sit here and talk about Chrono Trigger and talk about why why Chrono Trigger was such a significant game to
Yeah.
me, and it was completely obscured by the fact that that game came out after the N64 launched. Like the Super Nintendo was at its end of life cycle, and that game completely flew under the radar for so many people. And there was nothing else like it. It was the first game to like do away with random encounters. You had a means of escaping battles, so you didn't have to run through a dungeon and fucking fight your way through it repeatedly.
And that's something that like whenever a particular in this case we're talking about consoles, but whenever a particular technology reaches its apex is usually right on the heels of the release of the next generation, and some of the absolute best products to come out of that previous generation happen right as the next one is coming out and are kind of overshadowed. Perfect example, some of the absolute best, like most amazing looking and feeling sprite based games were right at the same time that early 3D was happening, and early 3D was
Oh,
like
Symphony of the Night.
horrifically ugly. You know?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like Symphony of the Night comes to mind. I actually do a game from me came out. So or like one of my favorites or two. I picked two. But let's finish up the 3D sprite thing really quick. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
You're
I
fine.
know we also talked about Chrono Trigger. So much stuff.
So perfect example. And again, this is one of those ones that like it might not be the most accessible example, but like I loved a game called Heroes of Might and Magic 2. I loved that game to death. And it was like towards the end of the sprite artwork era where like all of the art just looks amazing. And then I never even really played the third one, but the third one was during that transition to early 3D, and it looks so bland and boring because, early 3D was like very few polygons, very basic. Like the second game, like the just the sprite work had like amazing like colors and just like it was so detailed. Whereas early 3D was like, there was an extreme lack of detail just because of the technical limitations. So it's always kind of hard being an early adopter of a new, distinct genre of technology, just like VR, which I find it funny that VR is like still kind of struggling to find its footing, even though we've had it for kind of a while now. But like, it's not like you see Nintendo and Sony and like all and Microsoft, all the big players really putting a heavy focus on like major IPs on VR. The only example I can think of is maybe like Half-Life Alyx was VR
I think it's
exclusive.
too much of a niche thing right now. Because
It's
you have
just
to buy.
surprising. It's surprising that it's still so niche.
You have to buy a computer or a console and then spend an additional $300-$400 on something. I think
On a
that
headset, yeah.
I think that that's too much of a reach for like
I think that they're doing a good job bridging the gap by having a lot of games have VR compatibility where you can play it with or without VR. And then that way, if you have a VR headset, you can access the separate side of it. And I think that's pretty nice.
So real quick, a game came to mind for me actually. Well, two, but one actually is a really good pivot off of this. You had mentioned about the cusp of old technology and new technology, and honestly, Oblivion came to mind for me. It's definitely not. I wouldn't say my favorite game of all time, but I'd say in terms of like, I would say the game that ushered me into the era of like where I am now as a gamer. And also like being right, like so Morrowind came out on the Xbox, obviously, and then that was I know people love or die hard for Morrowind. I didn't. I played it a little bit, but after Oblivion, so it didn't hit the same way for me. But I think the what's it called, the something of life, ease of life, no, what's it called, of life,
Quality of
quality
life?
of, yeah, quality of life updates from Morrowind to Oblivion were like astronomical, at least from my experience of it. So like I think it was right at the threshold on consoles when an RPG could be like that, and that was like the first time I talked to you about guys about this in the chat the other day. The first time I played that game, I had literally never had an experience like that before. I had even played 3D games, but I couldn't wrap and even open world games like Grand Theft Auto or something. But for whatever reason, I couldn't wrap my head around what that game was, like the quest logs, how in depth it was. Like it was just like a whole other level, like of depth and storytelling and immersion. And like you said, what's it called? Uh, Atmosphere. Like it. That game probably was one of the most probably the most a game has probably ever blown my mind, I think. In terms of time.
Yeah. Same here. I had that same exact experience where I just like couldn't believe the depth of what you were allowed to do in that game. I mean, even now looking back on it, the fact that you could like place down poisoned apples on like a table and someone would pick it up and eat it and die, like like that's crazy. I mean, yeah, like it's that you could do shit like that in The Sims, I guess, but at the same time The Sims was like, I mean, it's literally in the name. It was a simulation game. So the idea of this
Yeah.
huge open world that had simulation elements like that was mind-blowing. And I'll be honest, I didn't have that same mind-blowing experience about like, oh my God, like I can actually do that in a game until damn near 20 years later with Baldur's Gate 3, where I had moment after moment of like, wow, you can actually like do that. Like I thought to myself, I wonder if I can do this, and you can actually do it, and it has ramifications or consequences, or like it plays out, in a way that's meaningful. So that's a huge, you think about it, that's a huge gap, because Oblivion was 2005, I think, and Baldur's Gate 3 was like, I don't know. It would depend on whether you're going from early access to like full release, but full release was what, like 2023?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think that game is the game that moved me, like I said, to articulate why, like, help birth me, like the modern gamer of me, because I think before that I was like just a Nintendo, like a Nintendo fanboy, played Zelda games, played like Majora's Mask, all of that. And then I moved more into like a immersive sim, like sim, like Deus Ex, like those types of games that like had a lot of crazy systems and stuff like that. RPGs, like it
Yeah.
helped. Like games like that weren't prevalent on consoles before that, and once I saw that type of gameplay existed, it really like transformed me. After that was like Fallout 3 and all that. It was just like completely birthed a whole new way of being. But like what you said about Baldur's Gate 3, I think it's like, I think you should treat those for what they are, though. It's like it's games like that are that revolutionary do only come like once a decade, or because then after that, then people are trying to copy it, and
Yeah.
it really takes like a perfect storm of elements to create something like that, I think.
Exactly, because it's like when GTA 3 came out, nothing else was like it, and it completely changed gaming. It had such an
100%.
impact on all of gaming, period, like everything.
100%.
Yeah. I guess.
So what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was gonna say previously, like before Oblivion, I think a lot of games, and not that Oblivion was the first to do it, but just like talking about our personal experiences, that in general gaming before that a lot of times gave you a like glimpse into a world, or where you were playing like a particular story in a world, whereas massively like realized open world games like Oblivion gave you an actual entire world, not just
Yeah.
like, oh, this little like adventure in a world that had some like lore aspects you could dig into, but all of Oblivion is an entire world, and the lore is all there. It's not like, oh, there's outside lore to contextualize it. Like the entire game itself is a lore dump.
They're not the
Definitely.
they're not the
No
I'm not going
more.
to say that they were the first game to do it, but like Morrowind for me was significant in the sense that like there was all these tomes that like fleshed out the world. Like there was all
Yes.
these like books you could read.
It's not in
And
a manual, Yeah, it's
yeah.
in the game.
So it could
Yeah.
help you, and
Oblivion.
they even went as far as like they even had they had the lusty Argonians. So like they had like erotica, you know.
Yeah. In universe erotica, yeah. I mean, I think Oblivion was just a little bit more accessible than Morrowind, just like
Yes.
Skyrim was a little more accessible than Oblivion. But Oblivion, I feel like it hit the right balance, that it was more accessible than Morrowind, but also like still had quite a bit of depth, and that is why we still like have such powerful nostalgia for it, because it struck the perfect kind of balance. And then I think maybe they oversimplified it a little bit too much for Skyrim,
Yeah,
and then
Skyrim
we
didn't really.
waited 10 years for Starfield, 10 years after that for Starfield, and it was like, yeah, you guys are going way too far in the wrong direction.
It's due to the popularity of gaming. I mean, gaming is a massive hobby for everybody because I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
especially
very
because of
mainstream
sports
now.
games. Yeah, so they definitely dumb it down. That was part of the reason. I know it was a criticism by some people, and don't get me wrong, I have my opinions on how I feel about the direction of Zelda currently. But in some ways, I kind of appreciated the fact that they didn't hold your hand too much and they gave you like a wink and a nudge.
Yeah, but
Oh, you mean with like Tears of the Kingdom and stuff?
Yeah, like Breath of the Wild, like because
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild, the one of the things about that is I'll even with this current playthrough, like when I first start that game from scratch, it's there's anxiety inducing a little bit because you're like, wow, there's so much to do and I don't know where to start.
yeah. Uh, I think though, because I know one of our major talking points was the Oblivion remaster. I'm so glad that really most of what they did was just giving it a fresh coat of paint, because the original game really did strike that perfect balance of being mostly accessible but having a lot of depth, because the a big complaint that you see nowadays with games, especially open world games, is that they're as wide as an ocean but as shallow as a puddle.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the biggest thing was like when you go back is like the physics and the graphics are outdated, and but the gameplay itself and the systems and the immersion is timeless. So they didn't fuck with anything from that game that was timeless. They just updated you know, what really was outdated, because
And
the
yeah.
systems and the story and everything were not outdated.
And it wasn't. It's because a lot of games nowadays give you a false sense of scale. What they'll do is they'll make the event horizon go so far, and you can see all this like vast wilderness and like wildland, but really you're kind of boxed in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and
remember sorry, go ahead.
I kind of feel like that's like where like I think open world gaming is going, where they're trying to copy Grand Theft Auto or San Andreas, where it's a whole state, or yeah, like Skyrim, like was trying to be. They're like people were like, okay, well, what's going to be bigger than Oblivion? So there's an urge to be bigger. So people have this expectation. Well, the last one was a state. This time we want a whole country, and I feel like people are finally getting over that. One thing I wanted to say though about it too, like say we all three played Oblivion, and I think that this is another revolutionary part of it. Oblivion, Fallout, these types of like massively open games have like a type of emergent storytelling where, because everybody goes a different route and can choose their own destiny, not only just with the factions they play or the character build they make, but also like the things that they come across. So there's like I said, an emergent storytelling that does maybe exist in a Zelda, but not nearly the same way that it does.
Yeah.
So you start having this like meta narrative and this other new meta game where people are talking about, did you see that skeleton locked in the fridge in Fallout 3 in that one town, or did you encounter that cannibal that'll eat you, or like stuff like that. That is like probably one of the coolest things I've ever experienced in a game before.
You
It's
know,
like the sharing stories part of it.
while I think of that, because I know this thought is going to slip away if I don't say it now. Fable is another one of the games that has made the biggest impression on me, and something I thought was cool in Fable 2 was at the end of the main storyline, it would actually show a brief like um recap of what your character, because your character changes as you go, like like your character, your in-game appearance, you can control, you can change your hairstyle and your clothing and stuff, but your character just physically changes based off of what where you put your experience points and everything like that, or what your alignment is. And the game would kind of go through as it was summarizing the kind of like the finale. It would show you your character at different points throughout the story and how you had evolved, and I thought that was cool.
Yes.
Because again, that's an example of what you're talking about, like emergent storytelling, where it's not just the game that the story, the story that the game is telling, which there is a main story to games like Fallout, or yeah, Fallout, Fable, yeah, and Fallout, and Elder Scrolls games and whatnot. But then there's also the story that your specific character is telling, which is different every playthrough. And
And
I just think
sorry,
I
keep
think that's
going.
cool. I don't know that I've ever seen another game actually do like a recap like that shows your progression, like gives you like a glimpse, like, oh yeah, I did have that armor set at that point in the story, or like, oh
You
yeah, I
know,
had that stupid fucking haircut.
one of the things that stuck out to me about Fable 2 is that if you took too much physical damage, there would be physical scars on your body.
Fable 1 had that too. Yeah, I liked that.
Yeah.
There were things that were actually outside of your control. Like
Well,
yeah, you could choose your haircut, you could choose your clothing, but some of the things that just happened, like again, that's not just emergent storytelling, that's actual emergent like physical traits.
well, and I think that this is kind of like I think why those games are so important, and this goes back to what George was talking about. Those gamers, once they got a taste of that, they wanted to tell their own story, and not just the story that the game wanted to tell. And so I think, say, like that has become like say with after I don't know, I don't think that say Minecraft came from Oblivion, but like the thing has been like increasingly more creativity and out of the realm of games that you would get creativity in before, like Sims or Sim City or management games. But like so now people are expecting a level of creativity and expression in all games. That's how we got a Minecraft, and now to come full circle, that's how we got Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. I think there's a level of storytelling and expression that people expect in their experience.
Yeah, that's a hard balance to strike when you want to have a game that has both a distinct storyline, a specific story that it wants to tell, but it also wants to be very open world.
Mhm.
That takes a lot of skill to juggle that, because how do you balance those things where you give the player an immense amount of freedom but also keep them, like, manage to fit all of what they could do into a story that is still going to be cohesive. That's why there's so many memes about that, where it's like, especially perfect example, Breath of the Wild, where it's implied at least that you're on a time limit to save Zelda before she, runs out of strength holding back Ganon, and then you're like fucking off into like some far corner of the world to collect Korok seeds or whatever.
Mhm. Or farming dragons.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
but
just
but
like, hey, the world's gonna end. I'm just gonna sit here and keep fucking with this dragon that shows up at dawn.
And that's why it's hard for me. I actually struggle with it. The Oblivion remaster just kind of brought it back that yes, you have all this freedom right from the beginning, where you can come out of the sewers and just immediately go wherever, but it feels contextually weird to go just like explore some random cave when I know that from a story perspective, like, there's a very time sensitive world ending crisis happening. So it makes it kind of hard, if I'm like role playing at all, to justify, you know, side sidetracking myself.
This is why I can also appreciate linear games that kind of box you in, because it wants to instill like, hey, your priority is this mission. Like for instance, like the most recent one that comes to mind is like Space Marine 2. Um, the gameplay is amazing. Awesome. I don't want to say amazing. It's awesome. I liked it personally. It's a personal opinion. The story is on the weaker side, but like otherwise, like I liked that, like there was enough degree of scale where you can see a existing world around you, but like you have one direction you need to go, and that's forward.
Yeah.
there's a
And
really good. Wait, sorry, you can go.
oh, I appreciate games that are like that for what they are. But again, when it's like an open world game, it's hard. Like, I'm like, damn it! Like, I feel like I hate that feeling. Like, especially because games are supposed to be relaxing. I already struggle with knowing that in real life it's like, okay, there's this shit that's important that I need to be getting done, but instead I'm finding myself distracted by this other less important stuff I would rather do. And that's exactly how I end up feeling with certain open world games where it's like, okay, the main story is like, it's very clear that this is pressing, but instead I'm like, it almost hits a little too close to home. It's like, yes, ADHD simulator.
So I'm gonna have to wrap it up in a few minutes. I got some other stuff to do. Sorry. Can I say something about Breath of the Wild really quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so I played Breath of the Wild and I fell off of it, but then I got really into Tears of the Kingdom, and so that was my really good experience of that Hyrule. But one thing I want to say about that game is it's not a traditional RPG in the sense of like all the numbers and leveling up. But what I if from my experience of Tears of the Kingdom, I didn't have this one with Breath of the Wild. Um, Whenever you're going and you're doing all the shrines and you have to go to all the corners of the world to acquire power to get good weapons to like raise your hearts and raise your stamina, it's not, like I said, it's not the same leveling system as like Oblivion, but it does actually feel like you can go to the boss right from the beginning. But the experience I had from playing 155 hours of Tears of the Kingdom was this general, like, it felt like it validated the lollygagging, the Korok seeds, because I knew that everything I was doing was going towards that I was really prepared to beat the final battle. And at the and so in the last battle of Tears of the Kingdom, you can you can skip all the dungeons. But if you skip all the dungeons, you have to fight all the boss fights and then fight the final boss. But if you beat all the dungeons, all the sages from all the dungeons will come and fight them for you. So then everything you do in the game makes your experience and your like of the last boss easier and you're more prepared for it. So I felt like this journey of playing 155 hours was preparing to fight this great evil, which was a really interesting experience. I thought it was like really beautiful.
That's like
Yeah.
this is only like related in the sense that we're talking about Tears of the Kingdom. Not necessarily like what you just stated, but you know, it
Sure.
brings to thought too. Like we talked earlier about, to circle back to something that was pointed out about Link being young and androgynous typically. There are concepts you can see, and they even made a statue at one point of old man Link, and he was going to be the protagonist, I believe, in Twilight Princess before they changed it.
I want to get that
Um,
so bad.
yeah, and you can tell that it still influences the game because in the concepts of the older Link, um, he had a mechanical arm, and it's very reminiscent of the arm that he has in Tears of the Kingdom to manipulate his environment.
Oh, that's really, really sweet.
He looks really cool. Like he's barrel chested. He has a beard. I think the idea was going to go with like rather than making it so in the timeline because it's always Link when he's young. They were going to be like, what if his destiny didn't start until he'd already lived a normal life for like 50 years? And
We need to get that one.
that one I like because my favorite Batman comic of all time is Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns.
Oh, that
And
one's so good.
that's so good because Batman's like old. He's like retired because they outlawed heroes, and like he's pissed off and he's like tired of seeing the world come to shit. And like you could definitely do a grumpier older Link who's like literally just farming fucking apples or something. Like, you know what I mean? Or like I don't know, like
Yeah,
he's just
definitely.
living his life, living a quiet life, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere, like it turns out he's like, you know, he holds the fucking, you know, the Triforce of Courage,
Funny
or
Yeah,
he has
enough,
the birthmark and never knows why.
funny enough, the Wheel of Time series, the writer, originally his first idea was for the main character to be a chosen one that doesn't find out that they're the chosen one until they're like, middle aged or like, later in life. And I actually think that would have been really cool to see. And in the end, he ended up being a youth, and like, it completely changed, in the end to be something a little bit, more traditional. But I do think that idea, like, that's such a cool idea that's almost never explored, of, the chosen one who doesn't, you know, they don't activate, like, their destiny doesn't call to them or activate until they're like in the later stages of their life. And I get it. I think in a lot of ways it's because fantasy in general is made more to appeal to younger people, where, their personal destiny is still forming. But I think that it's also, that kind of storytelling is also important for people who are further along in their story, because your destiny can always change.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing says you can't live a quiet life until you hit, the age of 50, and then all of a sudden you still have 20, 30 years of your life left to have some kind of crazy adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I misspoke. He doesn't have a mechanical arm in that concept. I posted the picture of it. It's just that he had a heavily armored arm. Because typically, Link has whatever his non-shield bearing arm typically has, like a pauldron or like a gauntlet bracer. But the old man Link, I think the old man Link concept would be a really good one to go with because, I understand that Nintendo wants to try and keep appealing to like everyone as a whole, but I think they also need to remember that a large majority of their like fan base that enjoys Zelda as a franchise are in their 40s now.
But we'll see games like Metroid Prime 4 coming out, you know what I mean? So it does still exist. And Metroid Dread, what, like back in 2021, like they do still do it, but yeah, so I believe in the potential of it, but no, you're totally right. Do you think that design, the Old Man Link design, turned into the Hero Shade, the character in Link Twilight Princess that teaches you like sword tricks? Because I know he's supposed to be like an ancestor or something like.
Yes. Yeah, he is. Like there's a really compelling video I watched that someone did on YouTube that's like it's about a half hour long, and it goes on to explain about how the Hero's Shade is it's the adult timeline Link from Ocarina of Time who is he's it basically he won't he can't pass on and leave the world because he's stuck on the idea that he's been forgotten. Because like when the time, like at the end of the game, you put the because if we're following the way that we think time travel works as a concept and it being a flat loop, and that all timelines can they diverge into different like scenarios. That adult Link still exists in a timeline. There's a timeline that adult Link has defeated evil and he's still there in like the ruined Hyrule during the rebuild period.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's the part of me that loves lore, loves that stuff, and yeah, I would love to see an old grizzled kind of resentful or cynical version of that Link, and just more sequels, more world building, all that stuff in general. I feel like we deserve that for sure. Just like the old Batman you said. I want to see a Link that is at the end of his, like, you're seeing Link often discover his power, grow into his power, and I think that's a powerful narrative for young kids, like we talked about earlier on. But to have the wise Link, the Link that like we want to get the strongest possible Luke Skywalker. We want to see the peak Luke Skywalker. We don't just want to see the Luke Skywalker right after he kills his dad or beats his dad. Like we all want to see. Like I want to see a game where Link is just OP right from the start. You know what I mean? Like
and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think there's something kind of inherently interesting about the idea of seeing a hero after their primary quest or whatever has been completed, where then it goes on to when they don't really know what to do with themselves after that phase of like, living vicariously then through someone else whose journey is just starting.
That's why I do like from a narrative perspective, especially like when you're collecting the memories in Breath of the Wild, they flesh out the world and the voice acting is really good.
Wait, and what?
They in Breath of,
yeah.
Yeah, like when you meet the various champions and you see like how like it's heavily implied that there's like there's a very deep connection between Mipha and Link, which that was also implied in Ocarina of Time as well. Because like the one thing I think, I don't want to say it's a problematic thing, but I can say that it's a turnoff to a lot of people, is the trope of saving the damsel in distress is kind of becoming kind of a tired old subject. So I mean, with Breath of the Wild, they've made it so that Link is like the champion. He's like the princess's bodyguard. And then I think I haven't played Tears of the Kingdom yet. It's one of those games where it's been sitting on my shelf and I just haven't started it. And it's definitely on my short list of games to play here in the near future. Finally got the motivation. But I, from what I understand, it's heavily implied that Link and Zelda are finally a couple in this one.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, keep going.
That's all I was going to say. I'm pretty sure because you have more time sunk in that game than me, so you can correct the record on it if I'm wrong. But I thought that what I was kind of gathering is that it doesn't flat out say it, but it's like heavily implied that Link and Zelda like have bonded to the point where they have like it's an actual romance between them for once, which that's never been a thing in the game. It's always just been simply he's doing a duty.
Did I thought maybe, and I haven't played it. Didn't Skyward Sword hint towards an actual romance between them?
Yeah, it did too. Yeah. Yeah, they definitely and I don't know, to comment on also what you said, George. It also it like you said, the damsel thing. It seems that the game depicts their role as that they are together, or it kind of leaves it up so like for interpretation. But there's a diary in Zelda's house that says about how she's going to miss him when he goes to war, or like you can find his like ponytail from the original game in her house, and like it's like there's only one bed there, so it's implied that they sleep together and all this stuff. And also like what you said about the damsel thing. Also, Link and Zelda share the same, like not role but responsibility, meaning that they're each integrally linked, or they're each integral to whether or not they'll succeed in defeating Ganon, I think.
I do like that, because don't they both embody like two different parts of the Triforce?
They do.
Yeah,
Link is courage and Zelda's wisdom.
Yes, which makes them equals. And I do like that a lot, because I feel like in a lot of Legend of Zelda games, they are actually equals, where instead of her being the damsel in distress, they're both playing very integral roles that are different, but at the same time equally important. And that's cool.
Because Tears of the Kingdom seems to illustrate that it's more of a partnership than a one-sided deal of the hero saving the damsel.
Yeah.
Well, you know what the wait, what were you about to say?
I was gonna say, and yes, sometimes it's implied that they're in a romantic relationship, but I feel like at the most it's ever only implied, showing that they can be lovers, but they're not necessarily lovers. Like sometimes their relationship expands to that point, but in general, they're just like they're always, sometimes lovers, but always very important to each other, to show that like that no matter what, they're always very important to each other, and
I really like the way they play that bond up.
Yeah. So obviously if someone is, if you're in a relationship with someone, they're important to you, but it's kind of like a, like all fathers are men, but not all men are fathers kind of thing.
So I'm gonna have to go in like 5 minutes. But what I think would be really, or I'm flustered. I think that like maybe links to Link to the Past. I don't think that Zelda. I think Zelda was just a damsel in that one. But Ocarina of Time with Sheik and everything, and I think that as much as a lot of people think that Zelda is about saving Zelda, a lot of times it is about the integral role that Link and Zelda they team up together to defeat Ganondorf. Like,
yeah, that's why it's called The Legend of Zelda. The games may feature Link, but it's because of the role that Link plays in Zelda's story.
That's like in Twilight Princess, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can't think of right off the top of my head, but like that's one of the only few times where you fight Ganon and she's with you in the battle, shooting him with her bow.
Oh yeah. And she's in Ocarina of Time as well.
Yeah, she's in it because she plays a Sheik. That was the first time they depicted her as having actual like combative skill.
Yeah, she shot the light arrow at the end of what's it called, of Ocarina of Time, and I think she shoots him too when he's Ganon. I think. I'm not. It's been so long, but I think so. So I think that's a great thing, because oftentimes, and now that I'm thinking about this, oftentimes people are saying, "Oh, these games are misogynist, blah blah blah, puts women in a bad role." But But like if you think about like Metroid, like a super empowered female Samus, and with Zelda, Zelda is always taking on a role. And she has the Triforce of Wisdom, so she's the one that has the strategy. She's the smart one, like.
Mhm.
So I think it does a great job of empowering females
That's why, I was just,
or women.
I was telling my girlfriend about Metroid, and I was explaining to her about how Samus is like probably my favorite heroine in all of gaming, because you wouldn't even know that Samus is a woman either, if not, well, I mean, it's been established now, but like, because in the first game, you figure out, I forget what you have to do, but you have to, the good ending, so to speak, is the one where it shows her without the armor, and then you figure out that Samus is a woman, and you're like, holy shit.
Big reveal. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what's funny is probably at the time they just did that for yeah. No, I don't want to necessarily assume, but like they might have done that just for shits and giggles. Like, oh, what if we made it like so that if you beat the game 100%, that like her armor comes off, and it's like she's been a woman this entire time. But then over time, at least, even if that wasn't, you know, even if that was kind of on a whim, now it's part of her character that she's this badass heroine.
Hmm.
Y- So yeah, I love it. I think it's really sweet. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to go now. But what I really like is it seems like we didn't even get to touch on any of the current points, and I mean we'll have to get to them soon. But this was a really great first podcast. And
Yeah,
how do you think we should wrap this up?
I think this was our origin story.
Definitely.
Hmm.
But
Since we focused on what got us into gaming. Yeah.
But I feel like interjecting, like I think this is a great formula. Talking about current, we didn't talk too much about many current events, but I think we both are all of us are really knowledgeable. I think we obviously talk about current stuff, but it sounds like we all have a really thorough understanding of how a lot of this stuff works, and I think we all have a lot of great commentary to add. So I think we got a lot to work with here.
That's
Yeah, I
what happens
definitely
when you're an old
agree.
head gamer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really sick.
Yeah, because I mean, we're all old enough to have seen how gaming, since like we weren't around during like
Pong.
the Atari 2600, playing Pong and shit like that. But like when gaming, like I mean, because really like Super Mario Brothers was like the turning point for gaming, and we all got to live to see that, and then everything that came after it.
Yeah. So, so yeah, I think that's a great period of history and evolution of technology from like say 1991 to 2021 or like or currently, you know what I mean? But that's a great and I think also like that we all have the angle that we are not just say COD players, but like just great appreciators of the art and the evolution of the medium. I think that's what I want the podcast to be about. Is just like a love and devotion to the art that is video games.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why
I
I
agree.
don't describe myself as a gamer because of the connotations that can come with that. I try and say game enthusiast instead because I feel like gamer conjures images of like Call of Duty, Mountain Dew, Doritos.
It's
Yeah,
tough because you don't want to box. Because what happens is when you begin labeling yourself, you people box you in, and
Yeah,
that's why, like personally, like for instance, if people ever ask me where I stand on issues, I'm very quick to say I'm writing my own ideology.
yeah.
great.
Yep, that's better than just automatically subscribing to someone else's.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's, and I also like to double back on where this conversation started of like how do we contribute to gaming, and I think, or like I've been saying, I've been trying to get involved in that conversation, and I think that this is a great way to do it. Like tying all the threads together, touching on the anthropology of it, touching on like how it affected our development as children. I think that that's a way of making it deeper and broader than, oh, let's just cover the news beats. I think that
That's
that's a really
making it that's making it personal instead of just making it like, oh, hey, let me just like hop on this train.
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. It's like we're curating gaming in general as opposed to like, worrying about what the hot button issues are or like what the outrage is. And don't get me wrong, I would love to discuss the state of gaming and things that are going on because I have very vast opinions about things because I think that,
Same with me too.
it gets because gaming as a whole can be the reason people don't realize that part of the reason why games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 are getting such praise is because they're not exploitative, they're not pushing microtransactions, they're not trying to use algorithms to fucking prey upon people's gambling addictions. You know, kind
They
of like how
also
FIFA does, where you have
they
to
also took
gamble
their
with your
time to
money to
go.
get a particular set of shoes. You know what I mean? It's stupid.
Yeah, but yeah, I'll put that in the talking points for next time. We still have all the other talking points. I got to wrap it up now, but
Yep.
I can tell this can go on for hours and hours and hours. How do we get Craig to stop?
You
Oh,
just hit
I
forward
can.
slash stop.
Yeah, I can take care of that. Yeah, I'll
Is there
I'll take.
anything in closing we should say or?
Well, just kind of what I was gonna say to follow up on kind of just the topic at hand is that I think art is kind of inherently deeply personal. So the idea of just going into something like this with the idea of like, oh, I'll just like you know be topical is I think yeah maybe this is just like a little bit like masturbatory at this point, but basically just saying like I think we're taking the right approach of making it about it what gaming is to us, not just
Yes.
talking about what gaming is in general.
Or
Mhm.
even how like when we were talking about Nintendo and how their storytelling is conservative. I love the angle of like like Adam has a knowledge of the history and how like what's it called, colonization may have affected things, or the US's intimidation tactics. I love a comprehensive and anthropological or historical approach to these things. I think it's like because we can I don't know, I just like love looking at things from as comprehensive of an understanding as possible, pretty much.
Yeah. No, I like that. Anthropological. It's an interest, that's a way to put it.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, I really appreciate this. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks for having us, and I appreciate this. I look forward to the next one so we can hash out more of the ideas because we really didn't even get through a third of the topics. I don't
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah. Just keep these topics coming too, because I'll keep getting scripts and stuff together.
We
Okay,
hit
that
pretty
works.
much exactly 2 hours too. So
I,
it's like,
I
yeah, we just
yeah,
kind of pulled a double for our first episode. That's
and
fun.
I
Yeah.
do think I do think that it deserves to be said too that with this being our first shot, I think Steven did a really good job of trying to rein us in and redirect us back to the topics and that's important because I know with me and Rob for sure we can go off on a tangent and
Oh yeah.
just like in any kind of like any kind of RPG, just in this sort of vein, we're definitely the types that will abandon the main quest and go right into the side quests.
Hey, but that's really good. And that's why I'm really passionate for structuring and stuff like that. So and even as we were talking and stuff, like when we were talking about the playing and everything, I'm listening, or when in your game nights, I'm listening for beats and stuff, and I listen to news and stuff every day. So I'm listening for the things that would not just that we talk directly about them, but that would create a stimulating conversation, essentially. So
Mhm.
Hey,
it's definitely stuff I'm thinking about.
you are Leon and we are Ashley Graham.
I don't know what that is.
That's a Resident Evil 4 reference.
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay. The president's daughter. That's
Mhm.
great. All right, well, I do gotta go now.
All right, Steven, you have a good
All
night,
right.
sir.
All right, have a
Yes,
good one, guys.
indeed.
All
That
right,
was
see ya.
is good. I'll get Craig to stop.
All right, and yeah, let me know if you need any help with any post production stuff or anything. We can talk about the getting it posted, making a YouTube channel, all that stuff here later
And
on.
we can even because you kicked it off, we can have you record an outro that's just you privately speaking and then edit that in.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works.
I can just upload the audio files, funny enough, to the Google Drive, like the shared folder, even.
Actually, well, I can do an outro now if you want.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, this was the first episode of the LAN Party Podcast. We had 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 talking points, and we only got to 3 of them. So that means you got to come back and listen to another one. I've been Steven, that was George and Rob, and we are game podcasters.
We are now.
Yeah.
Indeed.
All right. See you guys.
See you.